Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here today to talk to you about this is part of the college planning sessions, and more specifically, how to prepare for the ACT. So my name is Michelle Hunt, and I am an instructor with Kaplan Test Prep, and I get the wonderful opportunity to work with teenagers as they prepare for the ACT. So today we're going to kind of go through basically the biggest questions that we receive as teachers and as tutors in how to prepare and how to make sure that we feel ready for test day. So a few of the questions and the points that we're going to go through today are going to be, how should I prepare for the ACT? What test taking strategies will help me succeed? How can I reduce anxiety before and during test day? It doesn't just go away as soon as test day comes. And then also, I want to make sure that I leave you with some study resources so that you have a place to start and kind of get things going. So we're going to start with that first bullet point, and we're going to spend quite a lot of time here because I think that this is probably the biggest thing that will be helpful for you as you begin your ACT prep journey. So how should I prepare for the ACT? The ACT can be really overwhelming for students when all of a sudden they're getting ready to take it. It's like something they hear about, they know it's coming in their future, and now it's time to prepare. So we want to take away anything that would make that overwhelming. We want to see what the test is and get to know it so that students will be prepared and know what to expect on test day. So that's going to actually be the first thing that we do is we get familiar with the ACT. Now, I don't know about all of you and your testing experience, but for me, I struggled a lot when I was in high school. Tests were hard. I felt like there was a disconnect between knowing the information and then actually being able to tell you what I know. There was a disconnect there for me. And even as I got into college, I learned, I got my English degree, that I loved it because instead of a multiple choice test, I had the opportunity to write everything that I knew. And that was a wonderful thing for me. Okay. Now on the ACT, it is going to be multiple choice. And so we want to make sure that there is that connection between what the students know and being able to show that knowledge on the test. So getting familiar with the ACT, it takes away the guesswork of what's going to be expected and what do I need to know. We're going to get to know the test first. So we're going to go through and just break down the test and talk about each of the sections individually, what they're going to look like, what the timing and the structure is going to be like, so that, again, we're taking away that guesswork and we can sit down confidently knowing what we're about to see on the test. So the length of the test, 2 hours and 55 minutes. It is long. Now, that's long for me to sit through, let alone high schoolers, right? So we have to think about this almost like endurance training. So if you are a runner, okay, or just have an idea of what it's like to run a marathon, that's what we think about with this test. They're not quick little sprints that we have to get through. This is long distance that we have to have the endurance necessary to be able to perform for those full 3 hours. So that's part of the training in and of itself, is just being able to sit and use that brain power for that long period of time. Now, the different sections, we're going to go into more detail, of course, but we've got the English, the math, the reading, and the science. Okay, so the 4 different sections of the test. And then there's the scores. So you're going to get a score out of 1 to 36. Now, there is no penalty for incorrect answers. So we're going to use guessing to our, basically as a strategy, and we'll talk about that as we get into a little bit more of our strategic thinking. So let's go ahead and look at each of these individual sections in a little bit more detail, break them down so that we can really get to know this test. So first up, students are going to sit down and they are going to have the English test. This is the first one they're going to see. Now, it's 45 minutes, so it's a longer section of the test. They're going to get 5 passages that they are going to be reading. And as they read those passages, they're going to be answering questions as they go. Now, this breaks down to about 9 minutes per passage with a whopping total of 75 questions. So when you look at that timing, 75 questions in 45 minutes, it feels like that's a lot, right? That's a lot of work to be done in 45 minutes. And so we like to break it down per passage as well as per question. But we want students to recognize that some questions will go faster. Some questions are going to take a little bit more time. So if they can think about it as a time frame of 9 minutes per passage, that's going to help them be able to finish the test, at least the English test, right, in the time that is given. Now, as far as what is tested on the English test, this is most times students think of grammar. Now, it's not just grammar that's being tested. They're also going to be tested on writing development, writing organization, and purpose in writing. But this is going to be more of that grammar and language and writing section of the test. Now, the second one up, and I think this one causes the most anxiety in students, is going to be the math test. So 60 minutes, this is the longest section of the test, and they get 60 questions. So it's pretty quick math, right? 1 minute per question. And I can tell you as a teacher that some of these questions are going to take longer than a minute, but I can also tell you that there's going to be some that don't take a full minute. So we'll talk about this with our strategies, is kind of how to balance and make sure that you can give enough time to each of those questions to get as many correct as possible in those 60 minutes. Okay, so I promise it's doable. Now, next we have the reading test, and this is reading comprehension. So students are going to be given a full-length passage followed by 10 questions, and they're going to have to be able to refer back to that passage and answer questions about what they just read. So they're going to get 4 passages, and like I said, 10 questions per passage. So they really only get about 9 minutes per passage because this is only a 35-minute section. So again, when you look at the 35 minutes and they have 40 questions, you're going to start feeling that little bit of anxiety of, holy cow, that's a lot of questions in a very little amount of time. But again, this is doable. So while you get about just less than a minute per question, think about that 9 minutes per passage for both reading the text and answering the 10 questions. That's going to be the timing structure that you're going to want to work for in order to finish the section in time. Now, the next one is going to be the science section. So while I said math is probably like the one students are most nervous for, I think science is a close second. And the reason that students, I think, struggle with wanting to do the science section is because they don't always feel like they have science knowledge. Or they're like, hey, maybe I took biology, but I've never taken chemistry or physics, let alone all of it, right? So education-wise, our students have a lot of different backgrounds in what science they've been exposed to. And so when they see a science section of the test, they're just like, I don't know how to do science. Okay, but the beautiful thing about the science test is they're not testing your science knowledge. They're testing your ability to look at a text, to look at data and make connections. So it's more about logical reasoning skills that we're going to be applying, as well as being able to interpret data, which with practice, any student can do. So this test is very similar to the reading test, where you have those 35 minutes. You're also going to have 40 questions that you have to get through. But you'll notice here that we have fewer passages. And so there's 6 passages, and there's going to be 5 to 7 questions attached to each passage. So it'll kind of vary a little bit more than the reading section does. The reading section stays really consistent with the passage and 10 questions. In science, you're going to get those 6 passages and either 5 to 7 questions that follow. Okay, so this puts you at about 6 minutes per passage. Again, that feels really quick, but with practice, you can absolutely get there. Okay, so that's kind of the breakdown of each of the sections. I will make a note that you get a 10-minute break after the math section. So we'll talk about breaks, how to utilize breaks, and why they're so important. And when I say breaks, it's really break, unless you're also doing the writing section. So I wanted to make note of this, but this is going to be very case dependent. So there is an optional writing test. Not everybody needs to take this. So if you need to take the test, it will depend on where you live and the schools in which you're applying to. So this will require a little bit of research on your end, because you want to make sure that if your student needs to take the writing test, that they do. But if they don't need to, then there's just no need. Okay, so if you're taking the writing test, you'll take it after science. You get a 5-minute break, and then they'll go ahead and they'll give you 40 minutes for one prompt for that writing test. Okay, excellent. So as far as getting familiar with the ACT, that's going to be like the structure, right? But there's other ways that we can become familiar with the ACT. And this is going to go into, again, how should I prepare for the ACT? So first we get familiar. Now, after we're familiar, then we have to practice. We have to have experience with the ACT. So the more test-like practice that you can do, the better you'll be prepared for test day. And this is going to kind of be like a cycle. Okay. So first you practice. And then after you do, let's say that you took a practice test. So after you take that practice test, you might look at your result and you might like cringe. You're just like, that's not really where I want to be yet. And we tend to get a little bit discouraged when we see a number that's maybe way lower than we were hoping for. But rather than have that perspective, I want you to take a practice test and think, okay, let's look back and see how I did. Not, I saw a number and now I feel a little discouraged. Okay, so we're going to look back at the practice that you just did, and we're going to look for a few different things. So one of the things we want you to look for are look at the questions you got correct. Okay, so when we review, we don't just focus on the things that you missed. You want to make sure that you focus on the things you did well. Okay, so you will have strengths. You will know a lot of the information that's required from you. And so we want to go find that so that we can start building confidence with this test. Okay, the other thing is that we want you to focus on the fact that we can make progress, right? So you might have questions that you were really close on. So you might say, okay, missed it, but why did I miss it? And so again, changing the perspective from seeing, okay, what did I get wrong? Think, okay, how close was I? Where could I learn to see growth? So when you go through the questions that you missed, again, you're going to ask yourself some questions. Why did I miss it? Was I going too quickly and I made a small mistake? Do I not understand the content? Do I need to review how to do that specific content so that I know better going forward? Okay. Was I moving quickly and running out of time and I had to take a guess? And so I didn't even get a chance to see the question, right? All of these are going to be different options for why you're missing questions in your practice. So after you've done a thorough review, and I mean, I really do encourage students to go through and look at every wrong and correct answer and you review the explanations to those practice questions so that even if you get the question correct, you could say, okay, well, did I do this the most efficient way? Was there a way I could have done it and still gotten it correct, but could I have done it faster? Okay, so you can see how reviewing your practice tests are going to come with all these questions that we're trying to answer so that we can learn from our practice. Now, after we've done our review, then we move on to the next phase of studying based off of our review. So test-like practice leads to review, which leads to studying from the review. So if there was content that you needed to go over or that you need to refresh your memory on, this is that opportunity to do it. Okay, if you're noticing that you're making small mistakes, we go back to basics, we slow down a little bit, do some more practice at a slower speed so that when we increase that speed, we know, hey, I'm not going to make that mistake again, even though I'm going faster. So you can kind of see how this is a cycle, how we want to make sure that we're doing the test-like practice, we're doing the review, and then we're studying based off of that review. Okay, now what comes next? Back to step one. So after you've studied based off of your review, you go back and you do more test-like practice. So that's the opportunity to implement the things that you've learned from that review. It gives you an opportunity to practice with pacing again, right? So your pacing is going to be something that you're going to be watching as you study and is going to improve over time. And so we have to keep going back to that test-like structure so that we can work on our pacing, but also apply the things that we've been practicing. Okay, so as far as that process goes, and I'll kind of talk about the different ways you can approach it in just a second here, but that's really going to be the best way that you can prepare for this exam is test-like practice, review, and then studying based off of that review. Now, as far as how long you should take to do this, I'm going to first give you the ideal situation, and then I'm going to talk about maybe more realistically what you might be looking at. So as far as how long, we would love for students to be able to prepare for 3 months. Okay, this is ideal, and I'll tell you why, is because it gives students enough time to take practice tests, to review them, to study based off of that review, and then to go back and take another practice test. So if you do have that ideal timeline of 3 months, we recommend that students take one practice test every 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so that's enough time to be able to review and actually learn from what they did on the first test before they take a second one. Okay, and then you kind of just go through that process until test day, and then you're going to be feeling really prepared. Now, let's talk maybe more realistically. If you do not have those 3 months, what do you do? Okay, well, you're certainly not doomed. There's a lot that can be done in less time. So if you have less time than that 30 minutes, any preparation is going to be helpful, but think about scaling back that process that I just talked about. So instead of taking a full-length practice test, maybe you just take it section at a time. So you start with the English section and you take a practice just the 45 minutes for the English section, and then you review the English section and then you learn from that section. Then maybe you come back and you do the math section. So you can see we're doing the same process, but we're just breaking it into smaller pieces so that the review is a little bit quicker. And hopefully you're still learning from those mistakes and also finding your areas of strength to build confidence. But it's just on a smaller scale. Now, let's say you have even less time. You're like, I don't even have time for a 45-minute and then a 60-minute and then 2 35-minute sections. Okay, I have less time. If that's the case, then we break it down to passages and we say, okay, I'll do 1 English passage and then review that passage. I'll do 10 math problems and review those problems. 1 reading passage, 1 science passage, and you can see how the pattern is still going to apply. So we will still be practicing with test-like material. We will still be reviewing, learning from those mistakes and finding our growth, or finding our strengths, I should say, and then also studying based off of that review. Okay, so that process is going to stay the same. Now, as far as figuring out how to do all of this, because yeah, it sounds great, right? When you have the process and you kind of know what to do, but how do we actually make it happen when your students are going to have so many other things going on in their lives? So one thing I love to ask my students is, hey, what extracurriculars are you involved in? Tell me, do any of you have a job? How many of you like to hang out with your family or hang out with your friends? Okay, what are the other obligations that are going on in your lives? Because we're very aware that they're not just going to have all the time that they want to study for the ACT. So what we want to do is I encourage my students to kind of look at this as a long-term thing as well as a short-term thing when they're trying to plan their studying. So as far as the short term, I'm going to kind of start there. So I actually do this even as an adult. I recommend to my students that they pick one day a week. For me, it's Sunday because I have the rest of my week laid out in front of me. And so it's kind of just the beginning of the week for me. So on Sunday, I sit down with a planner and I look at my week and I say, okay, what are my obligations? And so with students, I'll ask them, hey, what extracurriculars do you have? What tests are coming up this week at school? What projects are going to be due? Where are the nights that you're going to be studying for certain classes that you cannot give that time away? Okay, if you have a job, where are your shifts going to be during the week? If you have commitment with family or friends, where is that going to fall? Okay, and we're teaching them, and this is going to be a skill they'll use for their entire life, on how to prioritize their time. What are the things that have to get done? And then what is the time left over for those things that we need to get these other smaller things put in there? Now, I say smaller, and I'm not saying the ACT is something small that shouldn't be prepared for. But the beautiful thing about ACT prep is that they can break it down into 20, 30, 45, an hour long, okay, sessions that can be shorter for whatever they can fit into their schedule. So I actually encourage my students to take smaller sessions of time to study and do it more frequently rather than trying to sit for like a 2-hour block. So it's going to help them retain the information better. And it's also going to help them to avoid burnout, which is very real with our high schoolers. So if students can find 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there to do some ACT prep, and if they can do that 4 to 5 days a week, then they're going to be in a really good place for getting their prep done. Okay, so but I should also say on the flip side, let's say that your student is very busy during the week, but on Saturday they have a 2 or 3 hour block. We're still going to use those 2 to 3 hours, right? But we just want to make sure students are taking breaks and just being wise in their prep so that we can avoid that burnout. Okay, but as far as what they're studying in those 20, 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour-long session of studying is going to be that reviewing those practice tests as well as trying to study from those topics that they need from their review. Okay, now as far as like the larger scale goes, so this is going to talk about that specific and realistic goal of making that study plan. But I also like students to look ahead and say, okay, when is test day? What resources do I have available to me? And how am I going to stretch my resources so that I can get to test day, right? So we don't want them to take all of their practice tests right up front and then realize that they still have another month until the test. And so they kind of feel stuck. So looking at when test day is and kind of looking backwards as well at how much time they have available to study is going to help them to stretch their resources as well as be wise in their time commitments, whether they need to do a little bit more prep up front or if they are able to spread that studying out in a little bit less time, but more frequent increments. Okay, so that's going to be the best way that they'll be able to make that study plan. Now, another thing I wanted to emphasize again is to start with your strengths when you're studying. Start with the areas that you're good at. So think about this with the ACT, points are points. So if you can get more points in an area where you're more confident versus an area where you feel like you have to work harder for them, go for the points that are easier to get, right? So make your good really great, and then also still be working in those areas where you can see opportunity. Okay, excellent. So again, always review. Don't do practice and move on. Practice and then review. That's going to be the biggest takeaway that I want you to have from today. This we're going to get into in just a second with our growth mindset, but also embrace the mistakes. We want to make mistakes in a safe environment, not on test day. So make your mistakes and learn from them because that's where you're going to see the real growth in your score. Okay, so as far as the resources that are available, I'm going to show these again at the end with links that will be available to you, but there is going to be free test prep from ACT. So go to ACT's website and you can see what they have available for that test-like practice. Also through Kaplan, we have a partnership with the ACT. And so we do offer a free class session for students if they want to come and try out a class to see what it's like and to get some of that ACT content. We also have a free ACT test on the Kaplan website. So like I said, I'll give you these links, but you can check that out. And then we do have our full-length retail ACT courses. So these are going to be 8 sessions. We split the sessions. 4 are going to be math and reading, 4 are going to be science and English, and we alternate with them so that students are really well-rounded for test day. And then the ACT Super Score Calculator is a fantastic resource. This is so great for students because it gives them the option that if they take the test multiple times, they're able to pull their highest scores from each administration that they sat for, and it makes them that super score so that schools are really being able to see, like, over time, you know, this is a little bit more realistic snapshot of your students' performance and the things that they know. And so utilize that super score calculator. But I will say it's dependent on the school. So make sure that the schools you're applying to are going to accept that super score just so that you have a heads up with it. Okay, very good. So as far as the strategies that we want you to apply on test day, these are going to probably seem maybe like common sense, but students forget that this is a standardized test and that it's timed. So the first one is going to be to answer every single question. So even if that 5-minute prompt just came from the proctor and you're like, oh boy, I've got some bubbles to fill in, you go through and you bubble every answer. Okay, so you have a good chance of guessing correctly. And so we want to make sure that we have every answer bubbled in. Okay, next is to triage the questions and passages. I like to think about this as choosing your own adventure. Okay, so remember how we talked about playing to your strengths, and we also talked about how this is a timed test. So math, I think, is the easiest way to explain this concept, but it applies to every section of the test. Is oftentimes when we do math, we look at a problem and we decide, am I going to do this now or should I come back to it later, right? Where we save questions that we can come back to later that feel hard. So we actually want students to do that. We want you to go and find the easier questions for you, the ones that will take you less time, because that's how you're going to be able to have extra time for those harder questions, is by moving more quickly on the ones that are easier for you. So don't sit down and just look at this as I have to answer every question in order. You get to jump around. You get to choose how you want to approach the exam. Okay, now eliminate answer choices. Again, it feels obvious, but sometimes students forget. Even if you have no idea how to do a question, if you can even eliminate 1 or 2 answer choices, you have that much better of a chance at guessing the correct one. And odds are just better. They're more in your favor to get that question correct. Now, as we're getting a little bit close to the end of our time, I want to make sure we talk about how to reduce anxiety and even stress before and during test day. So I think it's important to kind of back up for a second and talk about what causes stress. I mean, okay, maybe that's a little too broad, but talking about the physiology of stress is what I want to start with. So when we have these thoughts, things like, I'm not good at this, or this is too hard, or I can't do this. Okay, what that does is it triggers stress hormones. Our bodies are amazing things, right? This is something it just does naturally. So it's going to trigger those stress hormones, which then we see the physical symptoms of, right? Our heart rate might start to increase. We might start to get a headache from all the tension. Okay, we're going to start to see those physical symptoms. And so this is going to impair our thinking. We're going to start really believing that we're not good at this and that there's nothing else there for us. Okay, so we also call this having a fixed mindset. So this idea of I'm not good at this, it means that we're avoiding challenges. We don't even want to try. It also means that we don't want to make mistakes because we're scared of those mistakes. And so we are basically going to have lower achievement because we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to grow. Whereas if we have a growth mindset, that power of yet, I'm not good at this yet, it opens a door to opportunity for growth. And so we can see, we're going to put in effort. This is going to help me lead to mastery. We love mistakes because it means that we can learn from them and we can do better in the future. And so this is going to help us to have that higher achievement. So as students are prepping, if they can keep that positive outlook, but even more so that growth mindset, knowing that they can do well on this test, they can prepare for this test, they can put in the time and the work and see growth. That's going to be the biggest way to fight that anxiety and that stress, is realizing that you can do this, but it's going to take practice. Okay, so putting time and effort into that preparation is going to combat those nerves on test day because they will be more confident. Now, the other thing we want to focus on is just knowing what we have in our resources here. So mindfulness, keeping that growth mindset, being aware of those stress responses that our body is giving us those signals for. And then deep breathing is going to help a lot. So just taking a deep breath and kind of realigning our perspective and trying to keep that growth mindset. And then having some growth mindset phrases, things that will help us to shift that perspective into the positive. The other thing too is just being prepared for the test, starting with the week before. These tips that I'm about to give you will help combat that anxiety as well. So focus on your strengths. The week before test day, we are no longer trying to focus on areas where we want to see growth. We want to focus on your strengths. Okay, really bolster that confidence going into test day. Okay, make sure you're registered for the test. You'd be shocked at how many times this happens to students where they're like, oh, I didn't actually register. So make sure that you're registered at act.org and then confirm the location of the test site. Do this the week before so that it's not the day before and you're starting to panic. Okay, and get a good night's sleep 2 nights before the test. This is important. It goes back to sleep studies that have shown that students can perform at 100% capacity off of 1 bad night of sleep, but they can't do it off of 2. So if for some reason students struggle to sleep the night before the exam, if they got good sleep the night before, that is going to make it so they can still function at 100% on test day. So 2 days of good sleep, that is our goal. Now, the day before the test, we want to make sure you have new batteries in your calculator. Make sure you have your photo ID, pack your bag, registration, snacks, water, anything like that. Make sure that you have it. And then do something relaxing. Do something that's going to take your mind off of that test entirely. Watch a movie, go hang out with friends, hang out with your family, anything that's going to take your mind off the test. And then go to bed, not too early, just stick to your normal routine, but just make sure you get some good sleep. Now, the morning of the test, wear layers. I'm sure that we've all experienced this. Either a testing center is too hot or it's too cold, but it's never perfect. So just make sure that you dress in layers so you can be comfortable. Eat a filling breakfast. For my non-breakfast eaters, I'm not going to tell you, make sure you eat a giant breakfast. Make sure you eat something, if it's a banana, if it's a bagel or piece of toast, but make sure you take a really good snack so that you have the energy that you need to fuel your mind for the rest of the test. Okay, read something. This is like a warm up for your mind. Okay, so you're going to have to sit down and start the English section. We want you to hit the ground running. So don't let that English section be the first thing you read that day. Read something before so that your mind can warm up. And then get to the test site early, just early enough that you're not rushed and panicked as you sit down for the test. Make sure that you have enough time to feel settled. Now, during the test, make sure you focus on the section in the question that you are on currently. If you're in the English section, you're not thinking about science. You're not thinking about math. You are focusing on English. Okay, don't linger too long on any question. That time is just going to slip away. We want to make sure that you are moving at a good clip so that you are moving forward with that exam. And then if you start to lose concentration, take time to take a break. So it's worth the 30 seconds that you might lose on the test to be able to realign, get your perspective on point, and make sure that you're pushing forward with a growth mindset. And then use your breaks effectively. Get up, stretch, get the oxygen flowing, have a good snack, make sure you drink some water and stay hydrated. So using those breaks, like it's just as important, I should say, for the test as sitting down and focusing on the exam as it is to get up and have a break from the exam. And so don't just sit there and let the time pass by. Get up, move around, and enjoy those snacks that you have. Okay. Also, one of the things, I have a little bit of time, I can talk about this when it comes to your snack. Choose wisely. So don't just take a candy bar, right? We want to make sure that students have something with a little bit of protein in it, making sure that it's food that is going to fuel your mind for the rest of the test and not just give you a little bit of a sugar rush and then leave you flat in the end. Okay, so just be smart and do make sure you take some water. Okay, now last but not least, I wanted to just leave you with where you can find these resources that I talked about earlier so that you can kind of see what the links will look like. And I'm going to recommend that you go, first of all, to ACT's website to see what information they have there for their resources. And then also, if you go to captest.com/just ACT, then you're going to see all the resources that we have at Kaplan as well. And there's a good number of resources there that you can utilize. So I highly recommend it. Okay. And then, of course, the ACT's website is where you'll find that super score calculator as well. All right, so I believe that I am getting pretty close on time here. So I wanted to say a big thank you for having me and for being able to present at this. I'm very passionate about my job, and I really do believe that students can do well on this test if they are able to prepare for it. And also if they can have confidence in themselves, they're going to do amazing things on test day. So I wish you the very best of luck in your prep, and I really hope that we see your future just as bright as you would like it to be. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.